class. She wouldn't speak up. She wouldn't go to the office or the library by herself. And I was shocked because I had this idea of her as this incredibly independent, spunky girl full of life and energy. And I just thought, shy, timid, I couldn't even, it just didn't compute. And so I had missed something in this time away, my time in the hockey rink. I'd missed something in my daughter's development. So we made this is her, like, does she look shy to you? She has this crazy fashion sense and she's a crazy talented skier and has tons of adrenaline. Like, she just this seems so confident. So look at her crown and her toque. You can't go out without a crown and a toque. So, but we made a goal that next summer, when she was 8, that we were just going to spend as much time together as possible. It was the summer of Mummy and Katie. And in my head, I'm like, I'm going to make it up to this girl that I've missed 2 hockey seasons of her life. And at the time, my hair had gone quite gray, which I've since changed my mind about that for a little while. So my hair was gray and she has this beautiful red hair. So we called ourselves Smoke and Fire, and we would just go out on adventures, and we had all the secret handshake. And this was right at the end of that summer. We hiked Mount Fernie together, and she's only 8 years old, and it's a real hike. Like, you're up there. Andy can tell you, I dragged him up there. It's a real hike. It's some climbing and some exposed, and some spots, if you fall, you'll die. It's an effort, but we did that together. And it was at the end of this summer that we had spent tons of time together. And so on the way down, I was thinking how to carry this energy forward. And she was really proud of herself for making it to the top of Mount Fernie that day. And we had such a beautiful day in nature. And so I said, what about if next summer we make a goal, Mommy and Katie goal, and we make a goal to hike a peak every week. And I said, and I can write a book about it, a mother-daughter book that will match my mother-son book, and it'll be our book. Like, we'll have our own book. And she really liked the idea. She liked the idea of spending time together, of, she was all fired up on the having finished this hike. So we said, yes, we're going to do it. And then we talked about it all winter. What hikes are we going to do? And what will the book be about? And my husband and Ollie got sort of like, well, they didn't want to be left out of the fun. And so then my husband started Googling epic family trails, and he came up with this Juan de Fuca trail on the coast. And so we went as a family at the start of the summer, before it was really hiking weather in Fernie. We went and hiked the beautiful Juan de Fuca trail. So there's Katie and I in the thing. And that it's interesting. Like, I think what appeals to children is not always the same as what appeals to adults in a hike. And on the Juan de Fuca trail, all over the place, people make these leaves that they cut out with faces. My children said they look like Groot's face. And so you'd find them, you'd come around a corner and there'd be a couple on the trail, or then somewhere there'd be like a whole field of them, or they'd be hanging up in a tree. And I think that was the most exciting thing for her here, where she's 9, is just finding those little leaf faces everywhere. And that's, as I observed, I would see the way they interacted with nature was very different. My son Ollie, he was very much looking out to the ocean all the time and like drawn to the expanse of it and just awed. Whereas I'd find Katie, my daughter, constantly tucked into little crevices of trees, or like under logs, or here she loved the tide pools. I love this picture of the tide pools. She was always making herself small and studying the minute parts of nature. And so she loved these tide pools on the West Coast. And then when we got back to Fernie, we undertook our peak a week, me and Katie, and it was it was, Bill says in one of his columns about hiking that hiking is like life, and I think that's so true. You have these plans and you're going to execute them, but it never goes the way you plan, right? You set out your best plan, and then you come into obstacles and you deal with them, and the road diverges and you go in different directions. And that's how it was. Like, we set out very enthusiastically, but you can see in these pictures, she doesn't look so super happy, does she? So it was hard. Like, it was, there was times when she didn't want to do it, when it was, it's long. It takes about 4 hours to get to the top of Mount Fernie, and that's one of the shorter hikes around here. And we had various things go wrong. So in the book, I tell the story of our peaks a week and our adventure, but it's not, I had to keep reminding myself, this is not a self-help manual. It's not that kind of book. It's like, I like memoir, where it feels like Carol Shields said, it's like you're talking into your best friend's ear, whispering into your best friend's ear. And that's how I approach memoir. So it's more like, here's our adventure, and I'm going to tell you about it, and you will laugh and you will cry and you will be entertained. And I'll also weave in some research. And so it's, for me, a memoir is companionship. And I've created space to think about my life and my adventure and my parenting and my relationship with nature and my children's relationship with nature. And then I create that space for the reader to do the same. But you can see how beautiful it is. That's the Three Sisters in the background. And I think on the cover of my novel, you can see the three sisters poking through. I love this picture of Katie with her back to the camera, and I initially was hoping that would be some kind of cover image. I've totally lost her. Oh, wrong direction. So the research I talk about, I read, I talk about some of the science of why green is good for you and how there's lower crime rates and less aggression in places that have more green, and that, in Japan, they prescribe forest bathing when people are stressed out, and that, the downside of screens and the upside of nature. But I also was really drawn to some of the philosophers around, like Aristotle. Aristotle talks about thaumazein. I'm probably saying that wrong, but how when you're outdoors and you're inspired by that sense of wonder and awe, it creates an impulse to make meaning and understand the world around you. And so much great thinking has been inspired by nature. Or Iris Murdoch talks about unselfing, that when we see an awesome natural view, it pulls us out of ourselves and our rumination and our petty problems, and we realize how all those things that we worry about aren't that important. It takes us out of that worry and self-obsession and ego. So I really like those parts of the research. I also found helpful things in the research about risky activity, when you need to, when it's okay to push kids, the risky activity, how much you need to hover over them, and when it's okay to let them explore on their own and find their own boundaries and learn to not gauge in too high of risk by the consequences rather than hovering parents. And also the funny boundary of, or the tricky boundary of pushing. Like, you don't want to push your kids too hard, because then they associate this outdoors time with being miserable or being exhausted or hungry or all of those things. But then again, if we never pushed our kids at all, maybe they'd spend their whole lives on their Xbox. So you have to find that balance. And here, I love these happy pictures, because they're, like I said in the last slides, there are some that aren't so happy, but here you can see she looks just so beautiful out in the nature. And she loved this one where she's sitting on the tree. It's a old growth forest near Island Lake Lodge, and it's less strenuous. That was less of an uphill grunt, and we just really played around on the trees. And I thought maybe that's what I should have spent more time doing with a 9-year-old than trying to climb the mountains in the end. But I also found that she really loved. So here you can see how far the hike is. Like, we've come from Fernie below there. She doesn't look happy walking up that single trek, step after step after step. But she was so happy when we got to this part here where she's climbing. You can see it's not a paved trail up, in Banff. We're out in the mountains and it's a bit sketchy, but as soon as we got somewhere where you had to actually climb and it was dangerous, she came alive. She loved that. She's more her dad than me that way. She loves the adrenaline. She loves the risky activity. You can see this is what she really loves. You can see her broken arm there, which she got from hiking or biking with her cousin, going off the bike jumps. But there's her dad and there's her. So that's what they would rather do than hike. And so I started, as the summer wore on, I started to remember there are so many ways to interact with nature, from climbing a tree to sitting under a tree and reading a book, to going and playing frisbee golf, to rafting down the river. And so my relentless fixation on this hiking, after a while, I started to realize was not ideal. That we can, I didn't have to make us do a peak a week just because I said I would. But at the same time, you can see that when she does get to the top, she looks so full of confidence. And I think that did work. That was part of the initial plan, to work on her confidence. And she did have that sense of achievement and accomplishment when she would make it to the top of the mountain. It's quite a feeling to get to the top of a mountain by your own power. But towards the end of the summer, I started asking her, what would you really want to do outside? And she said, well, what about our goal? What about our goal? And I was like, well, and I made that goal and I imposed that goal in our plan. But, the real goal was to have fun together and spend time outside. So we can do that anyway. And so here's one of my favorite moments in the summer. She was just sitting on this rock writing a book. So she's in the creek there, and this bad weather was coming in, but she was so lost to her process. She wasn't even ignoring the weather, or she wasn't even noticing the weather. And when I said, I think we have to go, Katie, it's storming out, she said, well, just let me finish this chapter first. And I love that so much. There's a helicopter pilot and Yevita Bedlowska. That's from a different chapter, a little treat for people who've already read the book. The rest of you can read it to find out why there's a helicopter pilot. That's a secret. And that's just the last picture, a beautiful place that I live. Like, this is where I live, right? So for me, that I can get out there and enjoy my good health and enjoy the beautiful, beautiful surroundings and share that passion with my children is so special. And I think from doing it, we also give our children that sense of gratitude. How lucky are we to live in this place with this forest and this tree? And it brings happiness, it brings joy, it brings stress release. But I think it also, well, I know that it also creates a respect for the environment. And through that respect to the environment, we can motivate our generation and the next generations to do what's right for the environment. Thank you for listening.
Oh, I asked you to bring me the mountains, and you really did. And the whole unselfing, you know, how can you actually stop to take a selfie of yourself if you're, you know, as you've written in the book as well about that size, how small you end up feeling. So thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Joining you in conversation tonight, Angie, is Bill Steer, also known as Backroads Bill. Bill is the general manager and originator of the Canadian Ecology Centre and its charitable foundation. He holds degrees and diplomas from Laurentian University, Nipissing College, McMaster University, and Durham College. Most of his work experience within the field of environmental education and special education with the Near North District School Board. He was one of the first male kindergarten teachers in the province. He says that's where he learned to apply his pedagogy of being fair, firm, fun, and flexible. He has authored a variety of natural and cultural books and thematic maps, including a navigation book entitled, "What Do Those Numbers Mean Anyway?" He is now a trustee with the Near North District School Board and teaches senior geography for Nipissing University's Faculty of Education and outdoor experiential education within the Bachelor of Physical Education program. In 2020, he was the recipient of the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching. He is currently working on a provincial school trip preparedness template process that will allow teachers easier access to taking their students outside. And Bill Steer is also a master at building a campfire. So if, and I hope we will again come together so that everyone can indeed enjoy the magnificence of a Backroads Bill campfire. And with that, Bill, I will endeavor to bring up your PowerPoint.
That's fine, Janet Joy, and thank you very much. And thank you to everyone. I looked at the list today and I've been watching people enter from the waiting room, and they're from near and far, people from BC, Ottawa, and at various latitudes. And it's very gratifying for sure. I saw in the chat room, Peter Jericho said, "You look far too relaxed." Well, that's one of the benefits of being outside. And we'll talk about this anxiousness. I don't talk about anxiety. I talk about anxiousness because as teachers, we treat that. Teachers are not therapists, but we are. We're the frontline workers with regards to dealing with anxiousness. But we'll get to that in conversation with Angie, and I have read her book, and I'm going to cite various references in the book because she makes those connections in the novel, and I urge you to purchase it and read it. It's entertaining to be sure, and it is in conversation with Kids in Nature. And our discussion is going to be why should kids go outside and why should we go outside as adults our entire lives, that's for sure. And these next slides, as Janet Joy rules them, are simply, this is where I am sitting, I should say, I'm all about locations. So I should say I am sitting within Samuel Deschamps Provincial Park on the Mattawa River, just outside the Canadian Ecology Centre. I'm with Bart the bear here in the background, and we have a fire going. Has been snowing all day. I do have my long underwear on, but I'm quite comfortable. And but these next slides are, I've traveled extensively, and these next slides are about the Galapagos and what Darwin introduced to us. This is actually Peter Nosko, Dr. Nosko's field camp in the Galapagos. Been there twice and slated to go back next year. We were slated to go back this year, but we're not going, obviously. And of course, it's the wild and wonderful of the Galapagos. But why I show you these slides is simply this, that everywhere we go, we tend to go and see unique things. But you know, these things are in our own backyard. And Angie nicely showed us her backyard in her slide presentation. I'm going through these Galapagos slides quickly. Oh, and there's Steven Spielberg. That's where he received his inspiration for E.T., from the tortoises on the Galapagos Islands. That's a true story. But now we're going to transition. I think the next slide is the majestic moose and our arboreal emblem of tree emblem of Ontario, the white pine. But we have these wonderful things in our own backyard. In the next few slides, I'm going to just make a few comments. This winter, I'm proud of setting up the game camera. And this is golden eagle and those phoenix poses. Absolutely wonderful, startling. I still have to set the camera up and think about how they're going to react when they get to the cache or the deer kill, and that umbrella effect of those wingspans, absolutely fantastic. I was amazed. You know, you bring the SD card back and you put it in, and all of a sudden you come across these I don't know, kind of winning photos, so to speak. Obviously, the Mattawa River is frozen, and these golden eagles are landing. But we'll just go ahead, because I think the next one, that slide, the upper slide, I'm so proud of that. Those bald eagles landing, and that one, you can see how the Wright brothers got their inspiration of how man and humankind should fly. But nonetheless, those bald eagle shots. And then one thing to note is the bald eagles are very social, where the golden eagles are very much more solitary. Okay, next. And I did wolf research with Dr. John Tabers at the University of Waterloo a long time ago, and the wolves are so wary. It took a long time to draw them in. I didn't put the group of 7 shot in here. I wish I would have, but I have a group of 7 wolves on the ice. But it's, and in Ontario is that controversy, you know, what are we seeing? Are we seeing the boreal wolf? Or are we seeing the eastern wolf? And of course, it's all about hybridization and the like. But nonetheless, capturing these wolves in the wintertime, during the daytime, because they're very nocturnal, thousands and thousands of nocturnal shots. And I think there might be one coming up here. If that's the map of Ontario, because that's my stick. Backroads Bill, who knows Northern Ontario, all my adventures, my work, my avocation on the CBC and Village Media and Sun Media. I've been doing that since I think 1988, and it is my avocation, the passion to go exploring, and it's all about going outside with a purpose. But we don't have to go outside for a purpose, and we're going to discuss that. And I think, these next few slides, I know daughter Ali, I think she might be on, but when she was at Limerick University in Ireland, you know, I got to thinking, I go all over the world and I see the Clints and Grikes on the Barren on the west side of Ireland near the Cliffs of Moher. And we have the same thing on Manitoulin Island and the Niagara Escarpment. So often when we go to places, we search for things, and we do have them in our own backyards. And this is well, these are the Dolmen Stones. I think this shot of the Dolmen Stones, not the one in Jordan, but the one in Ireland on the left, upper left. And then archaeologists in Canada, some think that these erratics, and you can see the small rocks holding up the large erratic that were placed by Indigenous peoples, but we can believe what we want to believe. But these mysterious stone structures exist, and it's some of the things I go out and try to find. I like this one. Before I went to the Cliffs of Moher on the west side of Ireland, on the right is the Devil's Rock in North Cobalt in Timiskaming Shores, just outside of Timiskaming Shores. One of the most scenic vistas in northeastern Ontario. And often I'll say to people, have you been to the Devil's Rock and seen this vista? And they look at me like I have 3 heads. But this was the inspiration for the Hardy Boys, Leslie McFarland and House on the Cliff. And the one on the left is the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland. But I knew I would take the same kind of shot and show, you know what, we have this here as well. Couple more slides. This is the Blue Lagoon. You can't see that Paradise Caribbean color in this shot, but there are places where we don't do a good job in our tourism, I think in many aspects, many places in Canada, because the beauty is on the back roads and the backwaters. But nonetheless, it's out there, and we've got to find it one way or another. This is nearby, and I'm bringing it closer to home now. The Eau Claire Gorge, probably 7 minute drive from here, from the Canadian Ecology Center. One of those places, and I guess it's one of the reasons why we take children outside in all 4 seasons, because we have 4 seasons, and every season is different. And the mood of these places and the sense and the connectivity changes each time we go to these places in different seasons. One of my favorite, New Post Falls, it's like the Nahanni, it's north of Hearst. It's a chasm in the rock, and it's unbelievable that that's here, and not difficult to get to as well. It's a bit more than a Sunday drive, but not much more. You can go in there, and so we have this majesty across our landscape across Canada, and that's the reason why. And we'll talk about this tonight with Angie. Get outside, stay outside. Vitamin for nature. Now, Richard Loveland talks about that in his book. I swear that I used that term before he, but there's no way of proving that. But I do talk about vitamin all the time. Yes, I can. There's Laura Kopinski, Director of Education here at the Canadian Ecola Center, and I, and going down the hill in the canoe this winter, having a great time. We're releasing a lot of endorphins. And kind of bad risk management. I teach that, but no helmets and no life jackets. And but you know what? A whole lot of fun, and that's another reason why we need to go outside. And nature produces that. Thank you, Janet Joy.
Oh, thank you. That was around the world, and lots of memories of the Galapagos there too. I wanted to bring the conversation between you and Angie in two different provinces together with a really simple question. And both of you have touched on it, but to focus on why should we open the door and let the kids outside? Whoever wants to. Angie, do you want to start?
I mean, I think it's the powers of observation will answer that question for anybody, because I know if my kids are on their screens, which is mostly what they're doing if they're inside, a lot of the time it's a constant battle to get them off their screens. When they get off, they are irritable, they're edgy, they're lethargic, they're not very social, they don't seem very happy. When they go outside, they come in and they're rosy cheeked and they're laughing and they're full of energy and they're social. And that is without fail. That is without fail. I'm not a scientist, but if I was and I was doing an experiment, it would be clear. So I just know that when my kids are outside, they're happier. They're more fun to be around. They seem to enjoy their life more. So that is the obvious answer for me. But I also really like the idea that hopefully, I mean, I don't know, like you said, we're in a climate disaster. What did you didn't say climate crisis, you said climate emergency.
Yeah.
And so it feels so helpless. What can we do? And I think one thing we can do is by getting out in nature, we respect it more, we value it more, and we're going to make the right choices as much as we can. And it's not a lot, but it's what we can do, so we do it.
Yeah, it's a good segue for me. I mean, I often say we can't do anything for the environment until we do something for ourselves. Doing something for ourselves is our mental and physical health. And of course, we've been challenged by that this entire year. But for all ages, nature allows us to do that, whether it's in urban parks or provincial parks or wherever. Nature does do that. But going back to your points about technology, I'm not against technology in the classroom for any age. In fact, I love gadgets like cameras and GPS units. It's a great motivator. But one thing for sure, we've got to manage technology, that tech time. We've got to get them off the screens, and we've got to get them elsewhere, and the elsewhere has to be outside. So I just wanted to dovetail on a couple of things you've said there. And the why, of course, is so important. When I find when we take children out, that it's very mindful, and they forget about all their woes. Again, we could have an experiment, I suppose, and there's been lots and lots of research done on that, but they're totally thinking of other things. When Laura and myself deal with anxious teenagers, some of them have been in their rooms for 2 years, and they come here and they're trying to earn some high school credits to transition into the college environment. It's called the dual credit program. We see drastic differences when we just take them outside and they have the chance to, they are teenagers, and we'll discuss a little more about play. We have to introduce that play aspect back into what the environment is all about. But if you notice young children, and there was a couple of my kind of surrogate nephews here the other day, And of course, I gave them some rocks immediately. I haven't read them, and I thought one of the motivations is for, people say, probably will ask, how are you going to get them outside? Well, everybody needs a rock. After you read this book, and you take the last line, and I think I will read it while I've got it in my hand. Take my gloves off. It says, I'm going out to play a game that takes just me and one rock to play. I happen to have a rock right here in my hand. And what do? I have the magic suitcase. I take the magic suitcase out. There's a bag in there. They choose a rock, and then we go outside somewhere and find rock. This is for people of any age. And of course, people love those rocks. They're souvenirs of being outside. And then, of course, we have cameras that take those photos. But at the same time, when we bring small mementos back like rocks, it makes a connection with nature. So the question was, why should we do that? We need to make those connections with nature and figure out how to do that.
My kids carry, when we go on a big hike or a big canoe trip, they always bring a rock back, and often I'll see they are carrying the little rocks in their pockets, and it's almost like a worry stone, they play with it. And yeah, I've never thought of that as a connection.
Right over there is the odd rock pile. I bring rocks back, and people bring rocks, and people take away rocks. And of course, my whole house, if you go on Google Earth and you look on my street address, you'll know what house I live in, because there is no grass. The front and backyard are all rocks. And it's not, I'm not against grass at all. And cutting, I'm against cutting grass. And I guess anyone that has organic gardens in their front and backyards and let things go wild, I applaud them. And these are some of the domestic things we can do and involve our children. Children should be involved in gardening from a very, very young age. And that's some of the things we can do.
I like what you said about the kids being anxious and that going away when they're outside. And one of the books I read in the research for this book was about adults who had quite serious depression or other mental health issues, and they would be taken on this big camping trip, and measurable signs of depression and stress would go away on day 3. They called it the 3-day effect. Once you're out for about 3 days, those things started to improve. And they were tracking and they would say when someone thought about work, their stress, the markers of their stress would physically show up on the graphs. But then when they stopped thinking about work, it would go away. And the more longer they were immersed in nature, the less they thought about work. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at Google and Google Photos, most people's prize-winning photos, or the ones they keep, are outside shots. I'm sure people have done dissertations on this, that we tend to go outside. We just now have to make that connection. I mean, Thomas Berry, a geologian, he called himself that, not a theologian, but he says, it's nature first and humankind second. And now that, as Janet Joy said in the beginning, climate emergency, yes, we know that. And after we come out of the transition out of the pandemic, we're going to have to do something about this seriously. We've been talking about it for a long time, but that's another reason why to involve children to get outside and try to get them to understand that they have to reduce their consumptive lifestyles. One thing we've been studying is studio ecology, that in the arts, if we make links with the arts and doing environmental due diligence, and then we'll have a better way. I think for too long we've been telling people we need people to discover it and do things on their own time, but at the same time provide that framework. And studio ecology is just that. And Hillary Cunningham and Stephen Sharper are here on a retreat. They're both authors, and Stephen is the author of the Green Bible, and Hillary is a novelist herself, Perdita, and it's something that we've been working on with their U of T master's and undergraduate courses, is this studio ecology and making those artistic links.
One more reason, Janet Joy, that we should get kids outside. We're going to have the whole conversation and answer to your first question, but is, I remember a friend told me when my kids were just little, he said, when your kids get older and you find that they're not as keen to talk to you, like as they're coming into those teen years, he said, I always found road trips were great because you're on the way to a sporting event or whatever it is, and you're not looking at each other, you're side by side, but you're kind of trapped together. So it kind of loosens them up and they talk to you. But I found the same is true of hiking or canoeing. They're just like, their friends aren't there. They're mellowing out in nature, and you're busy, whether it's paddling or hiking on a single track trail. So you're not staring each other in the face, but yet you're there long enough that they loosen up and they start chatting. So it's really a nice way to connect between the generations as well.
Yeah, I should ask you this, Angie, because of your work with the Hockey Mom, and as a hockey mom and writing about this is that sports is very regimented, and there's uniforms and there's deadlines and there's expectations in many juvenile sports. And I find when we bring children out to nature, there's none of that. They're here on their equal time. It's a great equalizer. And so I wonder what your comment about that was, having spent a lot of time in that area.
So my youth, I was very much raised in a family where elite sports was the thing. And so I'm very much in that mindset. I have to fight it a lot. So when you said about youth sports being regimented and there's rules and it's restrictive, I'm like, you could also be describing my personality right there, regimented and intense. And so I have to, even when I made the whole idea of us going out and spending the summer hiking a week, peak a week, was supposed to be to move away from that intensely scheduled environment of sports, and we we're going to enjoy outdoor family recreation instead. But notice the way I took this super intense goal and imposed it right on that time. And so this is a constant lesson for me, and one I learn in the book is just to chill out. You don't have to go outside in order to make a goal, and you don't have to time yourself and count your steps and make more peaks than other people. You can just go out and sit on a rock and write in your journal the way Katie was in that picture. But that is a lesson that I have to reteach myself constantly due to my personality.
Yeah, I'm going to do one of those citations now from your book on page 139, and I think it's one of the pivotal points in my mind. I mean, I enjoyed the entertainment of your life and everything else in the book, and that's why we read books, to be entertained. But apart from that, it was that connectivity that you came back to time and time again. But this quote, as you said, you try to coach your daughter in the beginning, that whole term of shyness, and we shouldn't use that term because it creates anxiousness. But on this quote, you said, we'd like my children to have that kind of relationship with nature, treasuring it as a space that gives the mind a holiday. I love that. Gives the mind a holiday from the complicated life, the perplexity of human relationships. And I mean, we've been talking about that. We create stress, but we don't seem to be able to figure out what the solutions to those things are. But we do know that nature, going out with nature with children, I know that one of the, as a faculty member in the BEd program, I say to my students, first thing I say to them is the students will not care until you show them that you care. And
Yes.
one thing I've always done is to take them outside, whether it was kindergarten, grade 1, or right through. That's what I do. I teach outside all the time. I know that there's people on the line that are laughing right now, whether I take them to Costa Rica or I take them on a canoe trip or anywhere to a green space. They know that, and they want to do that with their students. And of course, you mentioned earlier in your comments about risk management, and you do address that in the book as well, is that risk has to be portrayed as a positive thing, as a challenge. And that's what you were trying to do with your daughter, Katie, and then Kat. And I know she has another name now. And so we have to do that. We have to let them play. And we know there are people on the call tonight that would know about risky play. And that's something we all have to embrace to allow our children, our students, to experience that. But at the same time, give them boundaries.
We'll let Jenna Joy back in here eventually, but I just wanted to let you know you would like this. My friend Gillian Phillips at Nipissing in the English department, she has a course where she teaches hiking narratives like Wild and Richard Wagame's Medicine Walk and various books that involve walking. But she takes her class in a university English class out into the woods, and they do actual walking as part of it. So I think that's becoming more common to say, well, if we're going to talk about nature, we're going to talk about hiking, let's get out and get our feet in the soil and breathe in those trees.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I'm out here tonight. I have to be outside. It would be against my, I guess, everything I stand for as Backroads Bill and as a teacher, that I couldn't do this inside. And I have that luxury and I have that opportunity. And so I would utilize that just to create a little ambiance for our viewers there. And again, you've said it and we've all said it. And that's another thing about teaching children. The fire, for the most part, in most cultures, we circle the fire. And in most communities, that's that's a part to come together, to congregate. Everyone's equal and to do a lot of sharing. And the things, whether it's a camp environment or your family, you know, the business of singing songs and playing games, and we do a lot of that here. I mean, that's just the another aspect of another part of the day, being outside. And you think about that, we should see in the native cultures, indigenous cultures, of the sunrise ceremony and sunset ceremonies. At the same time, we should spend as much time as we can when we are outside.
You know, what I wanted to, there's so many things to jump off from that you've both touched on, but I wanted to, you know, in terms of something else to dig into, because last month our In Conversation with Moira Welsh and Gil Penalosa was about aging in nature. And we talked about risk management and freedom and how that was detrimental to the cognitive health of our seniors. And here, when we, you know, looking at, like, there's the 80 and then looking at the 8-year-old, if we protect them, we're that helicopter parent, we don't let them go outside, we don't let them, oh my goodness, Angie, take them on a cliff. You know, the brain expands with all of those risks that, you know, not only stimulate physical development, but our brain development. And so I wonder, with both of your perspectives, because Bill, you know, as an educator and an outdoor educator, and with the canoeing and the hiking and everything else, how you manage the concerns of other educators, the concerns of parents. To Angie, you take your family into the wilderness. Like you said, it's not like a walk in Banff, or for us, a walk in Algonquin Park or another recreational trail. So how do you navigate the benefits of that risk with all the obstacles?
Well, I've spent a lifetime doing that, taking students outside. And again, as you said in your introductory remarks about me, about this template I'm working on, it's an infomercial to package trips outside by teachers. And so it'll complement the forms and the policies that most teachers have to deal with. And that's a big problem, because we've become a litigious society in so many ways that we have to figure out how we can do this safely. And so back in the day, you know, you would just kind of inform your supervisory officers what you were doing, but that's not the case now. And of course, with the tragedy of the Temiskaming canoe tragedy in '78, and Jeremiah Perry, the young boy from the Toronto District School Board, I guess there'll be 3 summers coming up, it continues to set outdoor education back. But again, anytime you leave the school, I don't call them field trips, I call them school trips. And so we need to address risk, and we need to learn how to mitigate it. And it is, I mean, for me, it's whether it's my family. I remember I was thinking today as I was walking in the snow, and Allie might be on, but I remember as a young child, she made her first fire on her own. And then I thought to myself, well, my job's done. But as a parent, your job is never done. And then when I see her make fires better than I, and can do all kinds of wonderful things, it's that extension of that whole learning process. So the one thing I say, the risk is worth it. And it's all about using that common sense. I mean, we all start from, we have very little experience, and that's how we learn things. We may have to rely on YouTube videos now, and books and the like, and other people. We learn mostly from other people. Everything I know is from someone else. But so it's saying to yourself, well, when people say we can't do that, well, for me, it's like starting my fire. Of course I'm going to do it then, or I'm going to try anyway. And something we'll talk about a little later, I hope, is the people that are less fortunate than us. How are we going to get them outside? How are we going to get their children outside and provide those opportunities? Because sometimes school trips are the only opportunities they get to go into these green space environments. So, and I just see Larry Dyke from British Columbia is coming into the waiting room. And so that's, I'll turn it over to Angie for some comments, and I know she'll have some things that I'll probably want to comment on.
Yeah, I find it very easy to be terrified as a parent around all elements of risk. And I was, when I first had kids, when my children were babies and toddlers, I was very anxious and I worried about everything. I almost like I thought that was my job, was to worry about all the things that could go wrong and all the ways that they could get hurt. And I was at a Sport Literature Association conference, and one of the esteemed colleagues there, his wife was a retired pediatrician, very well respected, and she said to me, "You're teaching your children how to be in the world, and if you're worrying about everything with them, they learn that the world's a terrifying place, and that's what you're teaching them." And so that just shifted my perspective, that I should teach them that the world is a beautiful place in which they can make wise choices, and hopefully everything will go okay. And so that really, really changed, that single conversation changed my perspective. And sure, out in nature, there are risks, there are raging rivers, there are mountains that you can fall off, there's wild animals, but in the city, there are cars and there are creepy human beings, and cars are terrifying. Nothing terrifies me more than the things that could go wrong with cars. So there's risks everywhere. It's not just when we're out hiking a mountain. And I guess the idea with risky play is just to teach your kids and then hope for the best, not hover, but trust that their instinct will kick in, that they won't go too close to the banks of that raging river. When they want to climb somewhere, they're not going to climb somewhere that they would actually die if they fall, or they know what to do if they encounter an animal. So we're always talking about possibilities and checking in with them about their decisions, and then trying not to worry, which is a work in progress for me. But we had one night, my daughter was at Guides and she was walking home, a 5-minute walk from Guides to our house. But instead of going on the road, she cut through the forest and she ran into a mama bear and two cubs. So she came in the house looking totally white, her eyes gigantic. I said, "What happened?" And she told me the mama bear stood up on its legs and she was very close to it. She said, "But I just held my hands up and I backed away." And she said, "We've always taught them that's what you do. But we've also said, you just say, hey, bear, it's okay." Like, kind of talk to them. And she said, "I was too scared to say anything, but I backed away." So, I mean, that could have gone horribly, but it didn't. And statistically, what are the chances that some girl gets mauled by a bear on her way home from Guides? That would be unusual, and it didn't happen. But stuff can, I mean, if you worry about all the things that can go wrong in life, you will stay in your room with your iPad, and that would be a travesty.
That's right. Now, this doesn't necessarily fit with what I'm going to say next, but in your book, I'm looking at my notes now from having read this One Wild Life, is that people are unpredictable, the trees are constant, and you say that two or three times throughout the book, based on the scenario, that the context you're involved in. And so I wanted you to maybe comment on that. My comment about that is, of course, when you're with nature, you're usually with the people you want to be with, so you're in good company. And the other thing is, the other people don't really matter. And I started off by saying earlier this evening, when we go outside and we are in a different mindful state, and all the rest melts away. It is true. It is true. Whether we go to sit spots or me spots, or we're just walking along, it doesn't, the activity really doesn't matter. It's just being out there. It's the colors we see. And if you can arrive at the point as when the trees talk to you, that you've arrived. But anyway, I'd like you to talk about that. The trees are constant. Maybe you can give a couple of tidbits of information, or teasers kind of, to the people that have not read the book, and why.
I think you're right about. I think you're right about it, that when you're in nature, you choose your company, and also that the people you run into tend to be in pretty good mood. So human interaction is really nice. And I think about Juan de Fuca, which is a busier trail than the trails we hike around here. So we did run into people on our week there, but everybody was so nice and happy and easygoing. And it's just something about soaking up that outside air that puts people in a good spirit. But yeah, at the start of the book, I used to interact with nature. I would go out for a run or a hike when I wanted to work my way through some kind of writing trouble I was having. It's where I get my ideas, when I'm in motion. And so I would often be kind of hunkered down and like running or thinking, and I wouldn't really be open to nature. But as Bill alluded to, I had a bit of a crisis near the start of the book. I don't even know what you call it. Online bullying, you'd call it at the worst. At the least, you'd call it professional crisis that played out online and social media. So I was very distressed, and I had to find a way to cope. And my way to cope was going out in nature with my dog. And I did did it differently. I was no longer hunkered down and looking out. I was, open hearted to the trees, like, help me, help me, help me, and looking up to their beauty. And I found, looking at the trees, these giant old trees that have been there for so long and will still be there for so long, and these mountains, it made me feel very small and insignificant, but in a good way. And that if I'm small and insignificant, then my trouble must be even more small and insignificant. So the trees just were, yeah, very there and very calming. And it helped with my, I think you could call it anxiety at that stage. And they
Right.
calm me. And so really what we were doing with Katie, I mean, her issue was with shyness was also social anxiety. So I guess I was hoping she would find the same peace of mind and calming influence of trees.
Yeah, there's a parallel theme there in the book, but you use the quote in your book as well from the book Wild by Cheryl Strayed, that, and I quote, the wilderness had a clarity that included me. And I like that quote because people often ask me, what do I get out of being in nature? Well, I don't know, at this stage in life, in my whole life, from the time when we were forced to go outside to play till now, it's like it's magnetic, and we need, and I say that politely. How do we, one thing is just to take children outside as much as you can, and exponentially over time, they know that that's the environment that they're best in, and if they discover that at whatever age, then you're partially along the way to success. And that's why I often think about the story here when we were doing a lot of videotaping, and I was in the back of a pickup truck, and this class was going along the side as we went through the throng, and one of the kids said, "Oh, there goes a beaver," but it was really a groundhog, and I knew there was more work to be done at that particular time. It's that also get them out there, and then of course try to understand basic ecology, the relationship between the biotic and the abiotic, and that's something we need to do in this climate emergency as well.
And the clarity that you talk about, the clarity is often that comes to me is like, oh, this doesn't matter. This thing that I am so stressed about, it doesn't matter. Like, what are the petty little human interactions or the things that we ruminate over? In the long scheme, it's unimportant. And so that's very freeing.
In
I
your
find
book,
that in nature.
yeah, well, you talk a couple of times, you talk about biophilia, that, the term coined by Dr. Edward O. Wilson, and why we, our relationship, and all our relationships, I think, they vary, they can be different, the motivations, it's vast, but I mean, our default, I think, it is, I mean, during the pandemic, the good doctors, for the most part, have said, okay, let's go outside. And I think we've heeded that advice. And so the questions now are, will we stay outside? Have we discovered that value? And have we discovered how important nature is and the environment is to us? And I have no answer to that, but I know for the younger generations, they're going to find about that in their lifetime, to be sure. I mean, as on a doomsday footing, I believe in carrying capacity. I don't know how the world can carry 10 billion people. So we've got to do something about it, and sooner the better, in all the things that we do.
Yeah.
I'm going to add a couple bugs to the fire.
Another
Go ahead,
lesson,
Jennifer.
this is a change of topic, but another lesson I think the outdoors teaches children is that you can only control what you can control, and the rest you just find a way to weather. So you decide to go on a hike and it starts pouring rain, or it starts snowing, or you run into some wildlife, or someone falls and cuts themselves. Like, there's always things go wrong, and you just figure out how to fix it and you carry on. And like you say in one of your blog posts, hiking is like life. So it teaches them that you have this journey and things are going to go wrong along the way, and you figure it out and you adjust and you cope with it and you keep on going. And so it does have that component of education as well.
Yeah, no, and one thing into a deeper dive, for instance, right now I'm inside and the rest of you are outside. If we look at the word out and in, really we should change that. Outside, it always had that negative connotation, but really outside is is really better than inside. So again, I'm inside and you're outside, as in the collective we.
I have one final question or prompt. I told Angie and Bill that I was providing prompts, not questions, because this is not an interview, and it's been a lively conversation, which is what I was expecting, and you've more than delivered. But I wanted to prompt you with one more item before we open the floor, the chat room, with any questions from our audience. So Angie and Bill, there was a recent article in the Toronto Star, and they were talking about the millions of students who, along with their parents, caregivers, and guardians, have experienced a year like no other. The disrupted school days are adding up, leaving many to wonder how things are going for the children. And the Star asked the question, are these the lost years? And I don't know, maybe I'm just like always a glass half full, or just turning it upside down to be that. My question or my prompt to you is, could time outdoors be the found years for the kids? It's like Bill and your rock, finding those rocks and finding a piece of the earth and physically grounding them. So it's a large prompt question, but I just the lost years is just so sad. I can't bear it.
Yeah.
So what can nature, what can being outdoors, and as well, Bill, with what you brought up earlier, for those who are, for the kids who can't necessarily afford, and their families afford to send them to a camp, to go camping, to get outdoors, and what we think of requires monies, and how can we do or encourage? I've just totally convoluted my found years. I'm looking to find the thought there, but do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah. And I think I agree with you that there are positives, and I'll come back to that. And you could call them the found years. I also see your dilemma and why it gets convoluted, because I mean, we're in a dark place. I think everybody has hit the wall with this pandemic, and I have had so many conversations today with people crying. Some of them were teenagers, and then some of them were adults who are in charge of helping the teenagers not cry, but the adults are crying too. It's just, it seems like it's never going to end, and we've given up so much, and children have lost so much, and a year is a long time in a kid's life. And so it's easy to go down that rabbit hole of but to bring it back to the positives, I do think there are some things, hopefully we will get through this and go back to something that resembles normal. And then there are things that we have learned and that we'll look back on fondly from this time. And for me, that is the getting outdoors. Like last summer, we went to Bowen Lakes and did a massive canoe trip with the kids. And it was everything. Like, it was amazing and beautiful and stunning. And it was pouring and, canoeing through the pouring rain and freezing and through storms. And it was everything. And it was so exciting. And my children said afterwards, the stuff that you have to work for is the kind of memories that stay with you. Whereas if you're just having fun on your iPad or something, you don't remember that. There's no work involved, and it might seem fun at the time, but you don't remember that time. Whereas those hikes or those canoe trips or those amazing expeditions is what they remember. And that's everybody is filling up the campgrounds and buying mountain bikes and buying canoes and buying tents, and the people who can are getting outside and doing that stuff. And that's a beautiful thing if more people are discovering the outdoors. And I think it's also because it's a really beautiful family time. Like, I used to travel a ton for work doing various book events, and I can tell that my kids are very happy to have me at home. I feel like a much better mom these last year and a bit than I was before, just because I'm all in. They can have all of me, whatever they want. I'm here for them because I'm not pulled in so many directions. So that is a nice part of this time. Of course, like you say, not everybody can afford canoes and paddle boards and hiking boots and trips. So and there are all kinds of ways to get outside, go outside and climb a tree and go. But yeah, you're right. It would be nice if it could be more equitable, and there could be funds that would help. Well, there are funds that help less privileged people get outside and enjoy these things too. See, now I'm going down the whole rabbit hole as you. Yeah.
No, well,
But
one thing, sorry, go ahead, finish off.
no, I'm finished.
Okay,
you're rescuing me. Thank you.
In my bivouac in education, yes, we have to, again, this school trip preparedness template. I hope that in all education circles, we allow more teachers to go outside to do that. So that's an easy thing to do. If we say, okay, yes, we have policies and guidelines and we can be safe, but allow them to go outside and go on these trips in the city and out of the city, and whether they're overnight stays, like places like the Canadian Ecology Center and many other places. I mean, we'll see if there's a great hue and cry very soon, whether, camps will open in any province, never mind Ontario. But going back to something you said, Angie, about the memories, I can tell you from a lifetime of doing this, when I see them as adults, and actually this summer, the summer school principal for the Near North District School Board, he's one of the original eco campers. So for in essence, we work for him now, and he was like 14 years old, and I told him he wasn't a very good student anyway, but he was a good student. But anyone of any age, whether it's those kindergarten, grade 1 kids, and I took them downhill skiing, when they come up, they say, well, they don't even say hello. I remember when you took me too, and off of because they remember those things and how important it was to them. And even better still, when I whoever they are, and they say, I take my children to here and there and I do the same things, then I know I'm gratified that my journey and what I had to contribute is meaningful. And so never mind the rabbit hole, we do have to get outside and allow people to go outside. And it's good to see, for instance, Ontario Parks that has taken away the day use fee from Sunday to from Sundays to Thursdays, and they opened the parks up where they were closed down. I mean, I was solitary here like Thorough for a long time until they opened up in June, and so there are things we can do to allow access to a lot of our green spaces. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. And I think less people are going to go back into the offices, and they're going to, maybe these people that are in their homes, but will maybe use the green spaces more so in their neighborhoods. And I hope that is going to be the trend. And of course, we'll start to travel again, and maybe we'll travel for other reasons than just going to, there's nothing wrong going to the beach in Cuba, but if we are going to travel, and all of us are big bugbears, we don't know our own country because airfares are too expensive. I tell people when I go to Greenland or Iceland, I can't get to Nunavut to Iqaluit. I can get cheaper to get to Greenland going through Copenhagen, and that's a shame. And our country has this, it is a vast and magnificent land, and we need to discover it.
Yeah. And, while there is a class issue, you're right, the trails all around here are open to anybody. Anybody can go climb any mountain. That's all. There's no fee for anything. And the river, you can float down the river, swim down the river, go to the lake, or go in the forest. So there are plenty of ways to interact with nature that don't have class restrictions or monetary restrictions.
Yeah.
And that is another thing with the pandemic, was exploring BC. And we always have explored close to home, but there's so much beautiful here. You could easily travel nowhere else in your entire life and have amazing outdoor experiences.
Absolutely. Jenna Joy, I think there's some questions.
Yes. So from Jennifer, she writes, in Southern Ontario, as in more city-based environments, it seems to be common for schools to have policies surrounding outdoor play that are so restrictive that even picking up some snow in their hands results in recess time being spent at the wall. And sliding down the snow hills formed from the plowing of parking lots becomes too dangerous to be allowed. Bill, have you experienced any limitations or boundaries regarding the openness of schools and school boards to not just permit, but embrace more outdoor connection activities and risky play? And how have you negotiated those roadblocks, if so?
Yes, well, that's a great question, and thank you, Jennifer, for that one. I guess I've always been an advocate, but we didn't use the term back in the day, of risky play, and there are good examples in Australia and New Zealand and many other places, and the advent of forest schools and the like, and we have people in the audience tonight that are getting those certifications. For me, it was always big forgiveness later, and that's not good advice to BEd candidates, but I mean, you have a plan, you identify the expected risk, there's unexpected risk, but you do your best, submit the plan. And so I think it's one of those things too, where I say, if you're not used to hearing no's, 17 no's until you get to the maybe, then you won't go anywhere. So you have to be, you have to do your due diligence, and you have to be forthright all the time and say, I want to take my students outside. And I think it's going to be easier, actually. I think it's going to be easier. We will have to follow all the guidelines. And so, yes, I've encountered that. We encounter that here at the Canadian College Center. We can have schools that are within a few kilometers, and some of the big school boards like Peel and the Toronto District, they come up here, they want all our certifications, and the next school down the road doesn't want any. So there's great inconsistency as there as well. But under the Education Act, you see in Ontario, the real power belongs to the principals. So you have to have people that are like-minded. It's a bad day if you have a principal that doesn't is fearful of going anywhere, whether it's snowball in the hand or otherwise. And we've got to get beyond that and be, how do we accept those kinds of things? I mean, now they don't go outside on cold days. There's all these limitations, and how we've got there. I don't know. It's just. But Angie, go ahead. You take a crack at that.
Oh, I was just going to say that outdoor education class is very, very popular here in the high school. It always is everybody's first choice and fills up. Not everyone can get into it. And I feel like they're under fewer restrictions, that that's a great opportunity for kids to do stuff outside. But I know exactly what you mean. There's this new litigiousness, and everybody's afraid of getting sued or something. And so the kids can't do anything dangerous when it's not stuff that's not even dangerous. I sometimes do some writing for Active for Life, this organization that really encourages multi-sport and getting outside and family activities and all of that. And they've pointed out to me that things like gymnastics that I used to do in school all the time, every year you'd have a gymnastics block, that doesn't happen in school anymore for fear of being sued or something. So my kids never learned at school how to do a somersault or how to do a cartwheel, let alone how to do the bars or any of the balance beam or those things that we did. And a gym class seems to be largely dodgeball. And why dodgeball is not dangerous, but gymnastics is, I couldn't explain to you. So there's not always any sense to it. But yeah, I'm afraid you can't really count on school. Although here we have an outdoor school. Not their risky play is one of their things. In fact, that's where I first heard the term and learned about the idea of letting kids find their own boundaries by hurting themselves if that's what happens. And so it is, like you say, there's like-minded people, and it's a movement, and some people are hearing it and some people aren't.
I have to share a quick thing. I was volunteering for 880 Cities and Eco Kids Canada on a pilot project of creating a school street in a West End school in Toronto. And we closed off the block for drop-offs in the morning, drop-offs at night. And the kids were supplied on the street with old tires, 2x4s, a rug, hula hoops, just like just bits and pieces of stuff that had been gathered from companies and so on. And what immediately happened was collaborative play, creative play. The kids realized that the street had a decline, a slant to it, and they set up the tire at the top and they rolled it down, and they immediately set up, one would catch it at the bottom, and they lined up and they took turns, and that went so fast. And the stuff wasn't made of plastic, it was recycled, it was upcycled, it was just stuff to play with. And I attended a conference not long late after that with Eco Kids, and they had children from some schools where they had containers full of this kind of same stuff that the kids would play with in the schoolyards. And these little kids, 8 to 12, let's say, they got up in front of all the educators and they said, schoolyards are boring. Like, there's nothing to do. And then, they got these tires and they got some dress up stuff, or they got to, and when they told of stacking milk cartons on top of each other, you could just see the entire room go, oh my God, and yet these kids, their brains were like firing on all cylinders as they explored risk. They explored the consequences of going too high. Yeah, so-and-so fell, whatever, he hurt himself, but he got back up. And so it's such an injustice that we don't let our children, I'm thankful I grew up on a farm.
Yeah,
Like, talk about-
exactly.
it wasn't play. It
Think
was
about this
work.
story. This may seem unrelated, but a good friend of mine who coaches my son's hockey team, he was telling them they were throwing some tape balls around the room, and he told them the story about when he was in university, someone threw a tape ball and it hit someone's eye, and the guy went blind in the eye. And so you think of how all the risk involved in hockey and all the ways someone could seriously hurt themselves, and then he got hurt by a tape ball in the dressing room. And the same with, like, what about if we decided that we weren't going to go into nature because of the threat of wild animals, and then my daughter encounters a bear on her walk home from guides? Like, you can't control where kids are going to run into dangerous things. So why deny them the opportunity of playing or of experiencing the outdoors because it might be danger? I mean, there's danger everywhere. So
And that's why we have to prepare them for those kinds of things. And the only way we do that is to take them outside by experience and say, and they become part of that risk management process. They understand how to identify the risks and what are the mitigations to do that, whether it's expected or unexpected. And when we do that, that stays with them. I mean, a lot of accidents may occur because it's in a social environment beyond, and there's drinking or drugs, but we can't all live by those bad examples. We have to give them those opportunities to work with tires and sticks and things, and that's all about experiential learning. And as teachers, as facilitators, if we're true facilitators, that's what we'll do. We'll give them those opportunities with all those things, whether it's balls or hula hoops. They love it, and at any age too. It's of any age. I can tell you that right in my practicals at university. You give them the frisbees and you set up a snowshoe frisbee golf course. They love it. They just absolutely love it.
when I'm scared of risk, I often think about the statistics. Like, if this thing that I'm worried about happening actually happened, it would be front page news. It would be so rare. So it's statistically unlikely. So for example, you'll remember, Bill, when I'm go on my solo hike in the book, I'm very scared. At one point there's cougar scat and I'm hearing sounds in the, bush, and every time I get jumpy, but I'm tell myself, like, the likelihood of me getting attacked by a cougar or a bear and dying in this area is less than me getting in a car crash. Yet I get in my car every day and drive wherever I need to go. So
Exactly. Other questions, Janet Joy?
There's further expansion of leading into the kindergarten program from 2016, which mandates outdoor inquiry play. And then that school boards push science and math inquiry learning, that the kids can explore the curriculum in a cross-curriculum fashion with an inquiry of land and community learning. And I think, isn't it like, when we think of getting outdoors and like what you said, Angie, about, we feel good. There are like-minded people who either want to learn about nature, be out there, go bird watching, whatever it is, look at bugs like my little neighbor's daughter. It's also community. You build a community when you're outdoors, whether it's with people or with the land or the trees, the cottonwood, or the birds or the fish, you know what I mean? So the community gets beyond just what we think of without the nature aspect to it.
I can't believe we haven't said the word spirituality once in this whole talk, because that's another thing, another benefit for kids or adults. Like, you can have a relationship with nature and not have a spirituality or some kind of connection to something beyond ourselves, and something that feels divine and has a spark of truth and magic. And having a connection to that makes life easier in any time, but especially in these challenging times.
Yeah, that comes with spending more time being outside. This past year too, it's often I've learned too about developing the eyes and the ears of being outside in nature, and the more you spend outside, I think the greater that relationship you have with oneself and nature and the things that are important in life that you want to do. And it may be, as I said earlier, perhaps we'll if we're allowed to go, students are allowed to go outside even more so, they'll have that opportunity, and they'll have that relationship. Because again, if we don't have that, I don't know how we're going to tackle our environmental emergency that we're now we've been within for quite some time now, and we've got to do some things where they're called drastic things with our lifestyle, especially reducing our consumptive lifestyles, and in so many ways. And as things become more expensive too, we are going to there's going to be more poor people, and we're going to have to care more, and also provide those opportunities, as I said earlier, to children anywhere to get outside. And I think the schools are going to be more important than ever into getting them back out on school trips. But we'll see. And I just remain hopeful about that. But it'll take people who want to do that, as I said earlier, that you want to go out and tackle that risk, and not have be fear that you're going to be sued or go to jail or the like. And as long as you do your due diligence. Someone asked that question earlier, and I always think to myself, if I've done my due diligence, then I go to bed and sleep well, because I've done everything I could. If there was an accident, you should not feel bad, but I mean, we all feel bad when something happens. So, but it's about doing what you're supposed to be doing, and the opportunity to see those smiles and that happiness and that connection with happiness, release of endorphins when children go outside. It's great. And one thing I've said this past year here, I miss their voices. I miss the voices right now, those students that should be around this fire right now, singing and dancing and laughing, and I'm only hearing the fire. It makes me think about that something's missing.
When you read the part from my book where it said that being out in the woods gave me a holiday from my mind. As you were talking, I realized it also gives me a holiday from COVID right now. Like when you're out on a river or out hiking in a trail or out camping in the woods, it's exactly the same as it's always been, because you've always been far away from other people and with your immediate bubble and in the fresh air. So for kids too, it's nice to have that one thing that's still normal. Like, let's go for a hike, and it's exactly the same as hiking has always been. We can take off our masks and not worry about for a little while.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to give you both an opportunity for a last words. Although there's a question that has just come in that maybe you can use as your finale as we come to time. Laura has asked, can neighborhood or backyard play be just as beneficial to health? Or do you think that getting outside in the woods or camping in deep nature has more of a benefit for young people or young children or people in general? So do we really have to get far, far from the madding crowd, or can we get that benefit, that spiritual benefit, that relaxation, calming in our own backyard? What do you think?
Well, I think everything starts in the backyard for sure, and in your neighborhoods and the like. So, yeah, there's nothing better than sleeping in your backyard, getting into that tent, and of course that leads to something else. That leads to many other experiences and opportunities. So no, we don't have to go to extremes. I think in our own terms, we have to, that spirituality, we have to, going for that walk around the block or to an urban green space, wherever it may be. The aspect about getting away from people, that's interesting. I would say, and we talked a little earlier about being with the people you want to be with. And so, yes, you would, I tend to want to be away from a lot of people, that density, we'll call it. But at the same time, you can pick your places and have those times to yourself. At the same time, when you go down to the beaches of Toronto on any given weekend and you see all those people, they're outside having barbecues, socializing, enjoying the water, the air. And so they're in their own little spaces. And I think really everyone else really doesn't matter in the time at the time. So I think to answer that question, Laura, is that you can be in the urban environment to get many things, and then look forward to those culminating experiences that you create for your children. And again, the more you do that, I think the more they'll look forward to doing that. I know students do. When are you going to take me outside? And then again, that's one of those touchstones when I know I've arrived.
Yeah, I agree with Bill that everything starts in the backyard, and any outdoor time for kids is great, whether they're playing tag in the neighborhood or playing basketball or climbing a tree or out at the park is awesome, of course. The studies that I read, several of them showed that urban hiking was less beneficial, showed fewer remarkable benefits than absolute wilderness hiking. The interesting thing was that they couldn't tell if it was really just to do with our phones. Like when you go out in urban hiking, you still have your phone on you, right? And you can still be scrolling Facebook and scrolling Twitter and getting texts and getting calls. Whereas when you go out in wilderness hiking, you're out of cell range, so you put the damn phone away. And so that's where a lot of the mental benefits of wilderness come. Interestingly, they're so tied together. So that's just my advice is let's all get off our damn phones. Get kids off them. I mean, they're so addictive. They're developed to draw our attention, and so to see children running around outside and not looking at a screen makes my heart have joy.
Well, don't. Oh,
Well, I wish, Angie, I wish this was the title of my life, This One Wild Life. I mean, that was so appropriate, but I urge people, because I have read it, it is entertaining, and there is that connectivity. All the things we talked about, I think, are in this book. And again, it's a few stories. And again, there's a climax that totally took me by surprise. So, and we're not going to give that away at all. And I think our audience out there, whether they've read it or not, will agree, and they'll agree after they've read that. And it was a joy to be with you tonight. And I often say that to all my whoever I'm enjoying the outside. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Bill. I enjoyed your fire and your bear. I wish I was there for real.
Well, I was certainly expecting a lively conversation, and you both have delivered. Thank you so much, Angie, and thank you, Bill and the bear, and all of you out there, because with you, we have created a connection with our natural world through stories, ideas, and passions. I hope that everyone can actually go outside in a minute, not right at this minute, but in a minute, go outdoors. Go outdoors. Take that deep breath again. Look up at the stars, if they're out yet, wherever in the country you are. And remember that memory of that child that you breathed in an hour and a half ago. Come back to that and stop and listen to the sounds around you. Because the phone is not with you. You, yourself, and I are in with nature, wherever that be. So I have to say, I am so grateful to ECW Press for sponsoring this, because otherwise it would just be an idea on a piece of paper. I am so grateful to Liam Guy for being the co-pilot tonight. You're a great flyer. And please indeed buy Angie's book. On ECW Press's website, they have a variety of formats available as well. This was a free ticket event, and it is a fundraiser. I hope you had fun. I hope you also learned and were stimulated and had some ideas for what you may do, not only with your own children, but our children, those around us, because we are the examples as adults, and we don't always know when they're watching us, but they are. So be outside, breathe in the fresh air, show them that, take that risk of taking a step into the unknown, because once it's unknown, it's known, and they'll do more of it. So with that, I hope you will donate to the Education Foundation. There was a link in the chat and on the invite, because it does help get kids outside. And we have one more left in our spring series. Next month is grief and nature. And I tell you, last March 2020, I wrote a blog about grief. and that was in the early pandemic, let alone now. And so we're going to explore grief and nature with a poet and with a doctor who set up the first creative writing through healing at Mount Sinai over a decade ago. And so I think it's going to be very different than tonight and from last month's, and but very thought-provoking. So I hope you'll join us for that. And that brings me to say, peace be with you.
And
Thank
also
you.
with you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Happy trails.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Be
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.